The ICU doors slammed open hard enough to shake the glass walls. A blood-covered man stumbled inside holding a handgun against his own ribs while terrified nurses backed away between ventilators and trauma carts. Security was already down. Someone screamed that the fugitive had killed 2 deputies downstairs. But near bed 7, the youngest nurse on the overnight shift never moved. Most people in the ICU barely knew her name. Small frame. Quiet voice. New badge. The fugitive pointed the weapon across the room. And less than 3 seconds later, he was face-first on the tile floor with his wrist broken, his airway protected, and the gun sliding beneath a crash cart. Nobody in the room understood what they had just seen. But they were about to realize that junior nurse had been lying about who she really was. Rain pressed against the ICU windows in uneven streaks, turning the city outside into a blur of white lights and dark glass. Inside St. Matthew's Medical Center, the overnight shift had already started badly. 2 nurses had called out sick. 1 ventilator room needed isolation precautions. The trauma elevators were delayed again. By 11:40 p.m., every monitor in the intensive care unit seemed to be alarming at once. Room 12 needs labs. Respiratory is asking for backup. Pressures dropping in 9. Voices overlapped beneath the constant mechanical rhythm of ventilators and cardiac monitors. Emily Carter moved quietly through the middle of it without speaking unless necessary. She was the youngest nurse on the floor by nearly 10 years. Her hospital badge still carried the thin blue stripe used for recent transfers, and most of the ICU staff treated her like temporary help rather than part of the unit. Nobody disliked her exactly. They just did not trust her yet. Emily. She turned. Charge nurse Dana Morris stood beside the central desk reviewing medication charts with visible exhaustion. You checked the sedation dosage in 7?
Yes.
You sure? Emily nodded once. Adjusted 40 minutes ago after his pressure dropped. Dana checked the chart again. A pause. Then a reluctant sigh. All right. Not praise. Just confirmation. That was usually how conversations with Emily ended. Across the unit, a trauma surgeon pushed through the ICU doors while removing bloody gloves. Dr. Nathan Reeves. Tall. Sharp-tempered. Running on almost 20 hours awake. How's my post-op in 8? He asked. Dana answered first. Stable for now. Reeves glanced toward Emily while signing paperwork. This the transfer nurse? Dana nodded. Emily kept charting. Reeves lowered his voice, though not enough. She's quiet. She works. That wasn't my question. Dana looked tired already. Nathan, not tonight. The surgeon watched Emily for another second before walking toward the patient rooms. You don't put inexperienced people in ICU during staffing shortages, he muttered. Emily heard him. She showed no reaction. At 12:05 a.m., a rapid response alert echoed through the hallway. A patient in room 10 began crashing after sudden respiratory failure. The ICU moved instantly. Doctors entered first. Respiratory therapists rolled equipment through the doorway. Dana pointed toward medication storage. Emily, epinephrine. Emily was already moving. Not fast. Controlled. She reached the crash cart before the order finished leaving Dana's mouth. Inside the room, tension tightened around the bed. The patient's oxygen saturation continued falling. Bag him. Pressure. Still dropping. Dr. Reeves stepped beside the bed, frustration building behind his voice. Come on, stay with us. Emily handed over medication calmly while watching the monitor. Not the patient. The monitor. Then the ventilator tubing. Then the 4-line. Her eyes moved constantly. Small details. Connections. Patterns. Reeves noticed. Most new ICU nurses focused directly on the patient during panic moments. Emily watched the entire room instead. That bothered him for reasons he could not explain. The patient stabilized after several long minutes. Breathing normalized slowly. The room finally exhaled. Reeves removed his gloves. Good recovery. Dana nodded tiredly. Emily silently reset equipment beside the bed. Reeves looked toward her again. You worked trauma before?
No.
Emergency medicine? A little. That's not an answer. Emily finished adjusting the four-pump. I've worked different places. Reeves waited for more. Nothing came. The surgeon gave a faint look of irritation before leaving the room. Dana stepped beside Emily afterward. You know he's going to keep asking questions. That's all right. You could make your life easier by talking to people. Emily checked the patient's pulse manually. I'm here to work. Dana studied her for a moment. Most nurses carried stress loudly during overnight shifts. Complaints. Nervous jokes. Fatigue written across their faces. Emily carried hers differently. Quietly. Like someone trained never to let exhaustion show. At 1:10 a.m., the ICU settled into temporary calm. Rain continued tapping against reinforced windows. Several patients slept under dim lighting while night staff updated charts and medication schedules. Emily stood alone near the supply station refilling emergency airway kits. Another nurse approached beside her. Lena Ruiz. 26. Friendly. Curious by nature. You seriously never talk, do you? Emily glanced over lightly. I talk. 3 words per hour doesn't count. Emily almost smiled. Almost. Lena leaned against the counter. So where'd you transfer from? Seattle. What hospital? Emily placed another sealed airway tube into the drawer. Different contracts. That sounds mysterious. It's not. Lena noticed scars along Emily's wrist as her sleeve shifted slightly. Not surgical scars. Older. Thin. Controlled. Before Lena could ask, a loud metallic bang echoed faintly somewhere below the ICU floor. Both nurses looked up immediately. The sound disappeared. A few distant voices followed through the ventilation ducts. Then silence again. Lena frowned. What was that? Emily listened carefully. Not casually. Carefully. Her posture changed almost invisibly. She checked the hallway clock. 1:14 a.m. Then she looked toward the ICU exits. One near the elevators. One beside the stairwell. One through surgical recovery. Calculating. Lena noticed. You okay? Emily's eyes stayed on the hallway. Where's security tonight? Downstairs mostly. Why? Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward the central desk and quietly checked the emergency phone lines. Operational. For now. Dana looked up from paperwork. Something wrong. Emily spoke calmly. Maybe nothing. That answer made Dana uneasy for reasons she could not explain. A few minutes later, an ambulance siren screamed outside somewhere beyond the rain. Then another. Then several more. The ICU staff slowly looked toward the windows. Something was happening in the city. Nobody knew yet that before sunrise, their entire floor would become a locked battlefield. And the quiet junior nurse nobody fully trusted would be the only reason some of them survived. By 1:32 a.m., the emergency department downstairs had stopped sounding normal. Even from the ICU floor, the change was obvious. The rhythm had shifted. More overhead pages. More movement through the elevators. More security traffic in the halls. Emily stood beside the medication station pretending to review patient charts while quietly listening to the distant sounds traveling upward through the building. Fast footsteps. Metal wheels. Radio chatter. Controlled urgency. Not panic yet. But close. Lena returned from the break room holding 2 coffees. You want one? Emily shook her head. You ever sleep? Sometimes. Lena handed one to Dana instead and leaned against the desk. They're saying police shut down 3 blocks near the courthouse. Dana barely looked up. Probably another gang shooting. Security said a prisoner transport got hit. That caught attention. Several nurses paused charting. Hit how? Someone asked. Lena lowered her voice instinctively. Don't know. Supposedly deputies were ambushed moving a federal witness. Dana sighed heavily. Wonderful. Dr. Reeves exited room 8 while removing protective eyewear. What's wonderful? City falling apart again, Dana answered. Reeves ignored it and checked patient updates on the central monitor wall. Emily remained silent. But internally, details were beginning to connect. Federal transport. Multiple police units. Heavy ambulance traffic. Late-night courthouse movement. The timing felt wrong. Organized. Not random violence. A security officer entered the ICU moments later. Officer Malik Turner. Mid-40s. Former military by posture alone. Most staff liked him because he stayed calm when others escalated. Tonight, he looked tense. "Dana," he said quietly, "administration wants restricted visitor access upstairs until further notice." Dana frowned. "Because of the shooting?" Malik nodded once. "Police are searching for one suspect still unaccounted for." Lena straightened immediately. "You mean nearby?" "We don't know." That answer unsettled the room more than confirmation would have. Malik continued. "Just keep patient doors secured. If anyone unfamiliar comes through the floor, call security first." Dana gave a tired nod. "Understood." Malik turned to leave before Emily spoke for the first time. "How many officers downstairs?" The question made him pause. "Enough." "That's not what I asked." Malik studied her carefully now. 6 visible. More outside. Emily nodded slowly. "What kind of suspect?" "Armed." That also wasn't the question. Dana glanced between them, confused by the sudden shift in tone. Malik answered carefully. "Trained, according to dispatch." For the first time that night, Emily's expression hardened slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Malik noticed immediately. "You know something?" "No," Emily answered. But she was already thinking ahead. She looked toward the ICU entrance doors. Then the secondary stairwell access. Then the long glass corridor connecting intensive care to surgical recovery. Too many entry points. Not enough lockdown barriers. Lena broke the silence awkwardly. "Well, this suddenly feels comforting." Nobody laughed. At 1:58 a.m., paramedics rushed a wounded deputy into the ICU under armed escort. The man was unconscious. Mid-30s. Severe blood loss. Gunshot wound through the shoulder and upper chest. 2 sheriff's deputies accompanied the stretcher while another officer remained outside the ICU doors. Emily stepped aside as the trauma team transferred the deputy onto the ICU bed. Dr. Reeves checked the wound quickly. Entry near clavicle. Exit lower scapula. "Lucky angle." "Lucky," one deputy muttered bitterly. Emily noticed his shaking hands. Adrenaline crash. The deputy looked exhausted rather than emotional. Like someone who had seen something happen too quickly to process. Dana began preparing medication while Reeves issued instructions. "Type and cross. Full monitoring. Keep him sedated until imaging comes back." Emily assisted quietly at bedside. Her movements stayed efficient. Controlled. Then she saw the wound clearly. Close grouping. Tight angle. Minimal hesitation marks around tissue damage. Not random firing. The deputy had been shot by someone trained to shoot under pressure. Her eyes shifted toward the officer guarding the ICU entrance. Then toward the unconscious deputy again. Witness protection. The surviving target. The realization settled heavily. Lena moved beside her quietly. "You okay?" Emily adjusted the 4-line. "Has security locked the stairwell yet?" "I think so." "Think." Lena blinked. Emily lowered her voice. "Please check." Something in her tone made Lena move immediately without questioning it. Across the room, Dr. Reeves watched Emily again. Not because she seemed nervous. Because she did not. Every person on the ICU floor felt unsettled now. Everyone except her. That was beginning to stand out. At 2:11 a.m., rain hammered harder against the building. Lightning briefly flashed across the ICU windows. For half a second, the entire unit turned white. Then dark again. A deputy near the entrance checked his phone suddenly. No signal. The second deputy looked at his own device. "Mine too." Malik's voice crackled through a nearby security radio moments later. Lower emergency entrance compromised. Repeat. Static swallowed the transmission. Then silence. Dana looked up sharply. What does compromised mean? Nobody answered. Emily was already moving. She crossed the ICU floor calmly toward the secondary access hallway and checked the magnetic stairwell lock manually. Still engaged, but weak. The mechanism buzzed unevenly beneath her hand. Someone had damaged the system downstairs. Lena returned from the corridor. South stairwell's empty. Emily looked at her. Did you lock it? It locks automatically. That wasn't my question. Lena hesitated. No. Emily walked past her immediately. Dr. Reeves noticed. Emily. She stopped. What? You're acting like you've done this before. A long pause. Then distant shouting echoed faintly from several floors below. Not hospital shouting. Panic. Running. Something heavy slammed against metal. Every person in the ICU froze. Another sound followed. A single gunshot. Muffled, but unmistakable. Lena whispered, "Oh my God!" Dana grabbed the desk phone instantly. Dead line. No dial tone. The overhead lights flickered once. Twice. Then stabilized. Emily looked toward the stairwell door again. Listening. Calculating distance. Movement. Timing. Somewhere below them, people were running. And someone else was hunting. At 2:17 a.m., the power failed across half the hospital. The ICU dropped into darkness. For 1 sharp second, every monitor died. Then emergency backup lighting activated in dim red strips along the floor and ceiling. Ventilators rebooted one by one. Alarms exploded across the unit. Patients began crashing almost immediately. Manual oxygen. Get respiratory in here now. Somebody reset those pumps. Fear spread faster than the darkness. Nurses rushed between beds while emergency generators struggled to stabilize the floor. Dana grabbed the nearest flashlight. Everybody stay calm. But calm was already disappearing. The deputy guarding the ICU entrance reached for his radio again. Nothing. Only static. Then came the sound from downstairs. 3 rapid gunshots. Closer this time. The second deputy moved toward the hallway instinctively. Stay here, Dana snapped. We may already be trapped, he answered. Emily stood near the central desk scanning the unit instead of reacting to the panic. Power outage. Communications failure. Security silence. Multiple attackers. Not coincidence. Organized containment. Her eyes moved toward the ICU entrances again. Elevators. Main hall. Stairwell. If she were forcing entry into a protected floor, the stairwell would be fastest. Less visibility. Less resistance. She stepped toward Lena. Move every ambulatory patient away from the hallway rooms. What? Now. Lena stared at her. Emily's voice stayed calm. Do it quietly. Something in her tone removed hesitation completely. Lena hurried away immediately. Dr. Reeves noticed the interaction while helping respiratory staff stabilize a patient. Emily, he called out, what exactly are you expecting? Before she could answer, a violent metallic crash exploded through the ICU corridor. Everyone froze. The stairwell door slammed open hard enough to crack the wall stop behind it. A man stumbled inside. Blood covered half his clothing. One arm pressed against his ribs. A handgun clenched in the other hand. The surviving deputy near the entrance reacted first. Police. Drop. The fugitive fired instantly. The shot shattered glass beside the desk. Screams erupted across the ICU. Staff scattered behind supply carts and patient room walls. The deputy returned fire once before the fugitive disappeared behind the corridor corner. Chaos consumed the floor. A patient monitor flatlined somewhere in the darkness. Dana dropped beside the nurse's station, pulling Lena down with her. Oh God! Quiet, Emily said sharply. Dana looked up. Emily was still standing. Watching. Listening. Not frozen. Focused. Another gunshot echoed through the corridor. Then fast footsteps. The fugitive emerged again deeper into the ICU, breathing heavily, weapon raised. He looked desperate rather than reckless. Eyes moving constantly. Searching. The unconscious deputy witness. He spotted the guarded ICU room immediately. The remaining deputy stepped into the hallway. "Stop right there." The fugitive fired twice. The deputy collapsed against the wall. Staff screamed again. Emily's eyes tracked everything automatically. Weapon grip unstable. Injured dominant side. Reduced mobility left leg. Tunnel vision toward target room. Adrenaline overload. Dangerous. But predictable. The fugitive advanced through the ICU corridor, pointing the handgun wildly toward staff. No one move. Nobody did. One elderly patient began struggling against a ventilator tube in panic. A young nurse sobbed quietly behind a medication cart. The fugitive reached the witness room entrance and grabbed a nearby nurse violently by the arm. "Where is he?" I don't know." "Don't lie to me." Emily moved slightly. Small step. Almost invisible. The fugitive noticed instantly and swung the weapon toward her. "You. Stay back." She stopped. Calm expression. Steady breathing. No visible fear. Under the red emergency lights, she looked younger than ever. Smaller. Just another terrified junior nurse. The fugitive pointed the gun directly at her chest now. "Get on the floor." Emily's eyes flicked once toward the unconscious deputy room behind him. Then toward the wounded deputy bleeding near the wall. Then toward the patients. Crossfire risk everywhere. Too many civilians. She lowered her hands slowly. Compliant. Non-threatening. The fugitive's attention narrowed exactly where she wanted it. Dr. Reeves watched from behind a doorway with disbelief growing inside him. Something about Emily had changed. Not emotionally. Physically. Her posture. Balance. Breathing. Like a switch had quietly turned on beneath the surface. The fugitive stepped closer. Bad decision. Emily saw it immediately. Distance collapsed. Weapon angle unstable. Weight shifted onto injured leg. Right wrist exposed. Everything slowed. Then moved all at once. Emily exploded forward without warning. One hand trapped the gun wrist before the fugitive could fire. Her shoulder drove directly into his chest. The weapon discharged once into the ceiling. People screamed. Emily twisted violently downward while rotating behind his injured side. A sharp crack echoed through the ICU corridor. The man collapsed instantly. His wrist broke before he hit the ground. The handgun slid beneath a crash cart. Before anyone processed the movement, Emily already had him face down against the tile floor using controlled pressure across his shoulder and airway. Not rage. Precision. The fugitive gasped in pain and tried reaching for his waistband. Emily trapped the movement immediately. A second weapon clattered harmlessly onto the floor. The entire ICU went silent except for monitor alarms. No one moved. No one spoke. The whole confrontation had lasted less than 4 seconds. Dr. Reeves stared openly now. Dana looked physically unable to process what she had witnessed. Lena whispered only one word. "What?" The fugitive groaned beneath Emily's restraint. She checked his breathing first. Not the weapons. Not herself. His breathing. Then she turned calmly toward the frozen staff. "Call trauma surgery." Nobody responded. Emily's voice hardened slightly. "He's bleeding internally." That snapped Dana back into motion. "Move!" she shouted suddenly. The ICU erupted again. Doctors rushed toward the injured deputy. Nurses retrieved emergency equipment. Security alarms continued echoing through distant hospital corridors. But every person who passed Emily now looked at her differently. Not like a junior nurse. Not anymore. Officer Malik finally burst into the ICU seconds later with 2 security officers behind him. He stopped dead after seeing the fugitive restrained on the floor. The ICU did not return to normal after the arrest. It only pretended to. Red emergency lights were replaced with harsh white overhead panels again, but the atmosphere stayed fractured. Broken monitors were replaced. Blood was cleaned from the floor. Patients were stabilized where possible. Yet nobody stopped looking toward the corridor where it happened, where it took less than 4 seconds, and ended everything. Emily was already back at work. No hesitation. No pause. No visible reaction to what had just occurred. She stood beside the wounded deputy's bed, adjusting his oxygen flow as if nothing outside the room mattered. Dr. Reeves approached slowly from behind a rolling cart. For once, he did not speak immediately. He watched her first. The way she checked pupil response. The way she monitored breathing before charts. The way her hands stayed completely steady. Finally, he spoke. That was not normal restraint technique. Emily didn't look at him. It was necessary. Reeves narrowed his eyes slightly. You broke his wrist before he hit the ground. He was reaching for a secondary weapon. That's not what I asked. Silence. The ventilator hissed steadily in the background. Emily adjusted the 4-line again. Reeves stepped closer. You stopped a moving armed suspect in a confined hallway, under low visibility, in under 4 seconds. Still no reaction. He continued. That kind of control is not taught in hospital training. Emily finally looked at him. Calm. Flat. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. I handled the threat. Reeves studied her face. Not searching for emotion. Searching for history. Before he could push further, security returned with federal agents. 2 men in dark suits entered the ICU with controlled urgency. Their presence changed the room immediately. Even the monitors felt quieter. One of them spoke to Malik first. We need full witness account. Lock down all footage. Malik nodded. The second agent scanned the ICU until his eyes landed on Emily. He stopped walking. Just for a fraction of a second. Then continued forward. But something had shifted. Dana noticed it too. These are federal, she whispered. Malik answered quietly. Not local response. The agents moved toward the restrained fugitive, now sedated and secured in a transport hold near the hallway. But one of them did not stay focused on him. He kept glancing back toward Emily, like he already knew what he was looking for. Inside the ICU break room, staff gathered in shaken silence. Lena sat on a chair holding a paper cup she had not touched. I didn't even see her move, she said quietly. A senior nurse shook her head. That wasn't nursing. Dr. Reeves stood near the doorway listening. He did not correct them, because he had stopped being sure what he witnessed himself. Outside the ICU glass, officers reviewed hallway footage on tablets. The video had no sound, only motion. A blurred moment. A man rushing forward. Then Emily stepping in. Then collapse. Rewind. Slow motion. Frame by frame. Even slowed down, it did not fully make sense. One officer whispered, "That's trained." Another responded, "Not hospital trained." Emily remained inside the ICU, continuing patient care as if she had already moved past the incident. But people were no longer watching the patients first. They were watching her. At 3:41 a.m., the federal agent who had been silent approached Dana directly. "We need confirmation on one staff member." Dana frowned. "Emily Carter." The agent did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the ICU glass toward her again. "Yes," he said finally. Dana crossed her arms. "She's a nurse. Newly transferred. Seattle contract work before this." The agent nodded slowly, but his expression did not relax. "That's what her file says." Dana frowned. "What does that mean?" The agent hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Her file is incomplete." Dana's voice dropped. "Incomplete how?" But before he could answer, Emily stepped out of a patient room behind them. She had overheard enough. The hallway went quiet immediately. The agent turned slightly toward her now. A long pause passed between them. Not tense. Measured. Recognizing. Emily spoke first. "Is the patient secure?" The agent didn't answer her question. Instead, he said something that changed the air completely. "You were not supposed to be here tonight." Dana looked between them instantly. What does that mean? Emily's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes tightened briefly, like a door being held shut. The agent lowered his voice. "Ma'am, we need to verify your status." The word ma'am was not casual. It was procedural. Reeves stepped closer now, watching closely. Dana looked increasingly unsettled. Verify what status? The agent kept his eyes on Emily. Because the way you moved tonight. He paused, carefully choosing words. That was not junior ICU training. Silence filled the hallway. Only ventilators broke it. Emily finally spoke again. Controlled. I am a nurse on this shift. The agent nodded slowly, but he did not look convinced. And for the first time since the breach began, the ICU felt something heavier than fear. Uncertainty about who had actually saved them. By 4:06 a.m., the ICU was no longer treating the incident as isolated. Security had doubled at every entrance. Hallway doors were reinforced with magnetic locks. Federal agents positioned themselves outside the unit, speaking in low, controlled tones into encrypted radios. But inside the ICU, the atmosphere remained tense in a different way. Not panic anymore. Awareness that something larger had already started. Emily moved between patients without changing her pace. Wound care. Medication adjustments. Monitoring vitals. Everything appeared normal again. But nothing felt normal. Dr. Reeves intercepted her near the supply station. "You didn't answer them," he said quietly. Emily kept her focus on organizing sterile kits. "I answered what mattered. They think you're something else." "I am a nurse." Reeves studied her face. "That's not what they meant." Before she could respond, Officer Malik approached quickly. His expression was tighter than before. "We have a situation." Dana looked up immediately. "What now?" Malik lowered his voice. Federal confirmation came in. The fugitive was not alone. The words hit the room harder than expected. Lena blinked. "Not alone." Malik nodded once. "Two more suspects connected to the courthouse transport are still unaccounted for." A heavy silence followed. Reeves exhaled slowly. "So the ICU wasn't the target." Malik corrected him. "It was part of it." Dana's voice sharpened. "Part of what?" Malik did not answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the ICU corridor. "The witness upstairs is still alive. That deputy is their link." Emily stopped moving, just for a fraction of a second, then resumed. But her attention had shifted. Malik continued. "They're searching the building. Systematically." Lena spoke quietly. "We're on the same floor as the witness." "Yes," Malik confirmed. Dana's face tightened. "So we're bait." Malik did not deny it. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire earlier. Emily finally spoke. "How many entry points are unsecured?" Malik turned toward her. "All stairwells are locked. Elevators are restricted. Hallways are patrolled." Emily nodded slowly. "That means nothing if they already have internal access." Malik frowned slightly. "What are you saying?" Emily looked toward the ICU layout map on the wall. Then the supply corridor. Then the secondary medication room. "They won't enter through the front again." Reeves stepped closer. "How do you know that?" Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a pen and pointed to the ICU schematic. "If you were trained to breach a secured medical floor," she said quietly, "you don't repeat the same entry point twice." A pause. "You split the response. One distracts security. One moves through internal service routes." Malik stared at her. "That's tactical assumption." Emily corrected softly. "That's probability." No one spoke for a moment. Then a distant metallic click echoed from somewhere below the floor. Every head turned instantly. Another sound followed. Not loud. Controlled. Like a door latch being tested. Dana whispered, "That's the service corridor." Malik immediately raised his radio. "Security check, lower utility access." Static responded. No answer. Reeves looked toward Emily. You think they're already inside? Emily had already started moving. Yes. She walked toward the supply corridor without waiting for permission. Malik followed immediately. Stop. Where are you going? Emily didn't slow. To confirm before patients are exposed. Lena hesitated, then followed too. The hallway lights flickered slightly as they approached the service entrance. The magnetic lock indicator was still green, but the panel looked slightly misaligned. Emily stopped in front of it, listening. Not touching it yet. Just listening. A faint sound came through the metal. Breathing. Malik raised his weapon slightly. Open it. Emily shook her head once. No. She stepped back half a pace. Her eyes stayed locked on the door seam. Then she spoke quietly. They're waiting for it to open. Reeves whispered. So what do we do? Emily looked at the lock panel again. Calm. Focused. Like she had already run the scenario in her head. We don't open it. A pause. Then she added. We contain them inside. Malik frowned. That puts staff at risk. Emily's voice stayed even. They're already inside the safest corridor of the hospital. Silence. Then a faint scraping sound came from behind the door. Deliberate. Testing pressure. Someone on the other side was listening too. Lena whispered, Oh my God! Emily raised one hand slightly. A signal. Silence. Everyone froze. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, a soft click echoed from inside the corridor. Not a weapon. A latch. Someone preparing to enter. Malik tightened his grip. Emily didn't move. She was calculating timing again. Distance. Response time. Crossfire angles near patient zones. And then she made a decision that shifted everything. We wait, she said quietly. Malik stared at her. Wait for what? Emily's eyes stayed on the door. Until they commit. The hallway fell into complete silence again. And for the first time since the breach began, it was clear. The situation inside the ICU was not over. It had only changed direction. The service corridor stayed silent for 17 seconds. 17 seconds where no one moved, no one spoke, and even the ICU behind them felt distant. Then the metal door vibrated again. A slow, controlled push from the other side. Not forceful. Measuring. Testing response. Malik held position with his weapon angled toward the seam. 2 suspects confirmed, he whispered. If they breach, I engage. Emily did not look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the lock panel. No, she said quietly. Malik frowned. No. You fire too early, you lose the corridor. Reeves glanced between them. And if we do nothing? Emily answered without hesitation. Then they walk into a trap they think is a passage. Another faint scrape came from inside. Closer now. Lena stood behind them, hands slightly shaking. This is insane. We should lock it down tighter or... It already is locked, Emily interrupted calmly. She stepped half a pace sideways, aligning herself with the corridor angle. Not in front of the door. Not directly behind it. Offset. Controlled positioning. Malik noticed. You're placing yourself in the blind zone. Emily nodded once. Yes. Why? So I can see before they do. A long pause. The metal clicked again. Then stopped. Like whoever was inside had realized something had changed. Emily lowered her voice. They know we're here. Reeves exhaled slowly. How? Emily didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, because they stopped pushing randomly. Silence again. The implication settled in. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was recognition. Someone on the other side understood resistance was organized. And recalibrated. Malik adjusted his stance slightly. We can request backup, breach team. Emily finally turned her head toward him. Not yet. That's an order, he asked. No, she said. It's timing. Another pause. Then the corridor light flickered once. A soft mechanical hum shifted somewhere in the walls. Emily's gaze sharpened. They're isolating power again. Reeves frowned. How do you know that? Because the pattern just changed. As if confirming her words, a distant section of the ICU lights dimmed briefly, then stabilized. But the effect was enough. The building was being mapped. Systematically disrupted. Lena whispered, "They're cutting us off room by room." Emily nodded slightly. "Yes." Malik looked uneasy now. "Then we don't wait." He raised his radio. Emily stopped him with one sentence. "If you open that door too early, they split into the ICU within 90 seconds. Malik hesitated. "You're sure about that?" Emily didn't respond immediately. She listened again. The corridor. The door. The rhythm of movement behind metal. Then she said quietly, "I've seen this before." The words hung in the air longer than expected. Reeves looked at her sharply. "Where?" Emily didn't answer. A silence followed that no one dared interrupt. Inside the corridor, something shifted again. A faint metallic tap. Once. Then twice. A signal. Malik tightened his grip. "They're coordinating." Emily nodded once. "Yes." Then, without warning, she stepped forward and placed her hand directly on the lock panel. Lena flinched. "Emily!" But Emily wasn't opening it. She was reading it. The panel's vibration. The micro-delay in response. The external pressure points. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she stepped back again. "They're not fully inside the corridor," she said quietly. Malik blinked. "What?" "Only one of them is at the door." Reeves frowned. "How can you tell that?" "Pressure pattern," Emily replied. Another pause. Then she added something heavier. "The second one is already inside the ICU service grid." That statement changed everything. Malik looked instantly toward the hallway behind them. "That's impossible. We sealed all internal routes." Emily's voice stayed steady. "They didn't enter through sealed routes." A beat. "They entered before lockdown was complete." Silence hit harder this time. Lena whispered, "So, they were already here?" Emily nodded once. "Yes." The realization spread slowly across faces. The ICU had not been breached from outside. It had been infiltrated before anyone realized the threat existed. Reeves stepped closer. "Where?" Emily looked toward the medication corridor behind them. Then the storage access hallway. Then the ventilation service panel near the floor. Her answer was simple. "Inside systems that don't require doors." Malik swore under his breath. "Ventilation access?" Emily nodded. "Yes." A distant sound echoed again. But this time it was not from the corridor door. It came from somewhere deeper inside the hospital structure. A soft metallic movement above the ceiling grid. Lena slowly looked upward. "No, no, no." Emily raised one hand slightly. "Don't move." Everyone froze again. The sound continued for 3 seconds. Then stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier. Malik whispered, "They're inside the ceiling network." Emily confirmed calmly. "Yes." Reeves stared at her now. "You knew this was possible." "I considered it." "And you didn't say anything earlier?" Emily looked at him briefly. "It wasn't confirmed." A long pause. Then she added, "It is now." Another faint movement echoed, closer this time. Above the ICU corridor. Not behind the door anymore. Above them. The second threat had fully changed position. And the ICU was now surrounded from inside. Emily exhaled slowly. Not fear. Focus. Then she spoke quietly. "We shift containment." Malik frowned. "To what?" Emily's eyes stayed fixed upward. "To protecting the patients first." And for the first time, everyone understood. This was no longer about stopping entry. It was about surviving something already inside the walls. The ICU had entered a strange kind of silence. Not peace. Not resolution. A controlled silence built on fear of movement. Every sound now felt intentional. Every shadow felt occupied. Emily stood near the central corridor junction, eyes scanning between ceiling panels, door seams, and the faint reflections in the polished floor. She was no longer reacting to events. She was tracking a structure. A system. Dr. Reeves moved closer to her, lowering his voice. "You said you've seen this before." Emily did not respond immediately. A distant metallic shift echoed above the ceiling grid, then stopped. Finally, she said, "Similar patterns." Reeves pressed carefully. "Where?" Emily's eyes stayed forward. "That information is not relevant right now." Reeves frowned. "It is if people here are going to survive it." A long pause. Then Emily spoke, quieter. "It becomes relevant after." Reeves studied her. For the first time, frustration faded from his expression. And something else appeared. Understanding that he was not being dismissed. He was being protected from information that carried weight beyond this hospital. Before he could respond, Malik's radio crackled sharply. "Federal unit entering upper corridor. Confirm visual on suspect movement." Static followed. Then a second transmission, faster. "Repeat, unidentified personnel detected in service ventilation access." The message cut off abruptly. Dana, standing behind the nurse's station, went pale. "What does that mean?" No one answered immediately. Because everyone already knew. The infiltration was not hypothetical anymore. It was confirmed. A federal agent entered the ICU corridor moments later, breathing slightly heavier than before. He saw Emily immediately. And stopped. Not surprised. Not confused. Controlled recognition. "Ma'am," he said carefully. Emily turned toward him. "Yes." The agent hesitated for half a second before speaking again. "We need to move you to a secure point." Dana frowned instantly. "Why her specifically?" The agent didn't look at Dana. His focus stayed on Emily. "Because she's a known variable." The words landed heavily. Reeves stepped forward. "Known to who?" The agent paused. Then answered carefully. "To people we are currently tracking." A silence followed. Emily's expression did not change. But something subtle tightened in her posture. Not fear. Containment. Like pressure being held behind a sealed door. Dana looked between them. "Emily, what is he talking about?" Emily finally spoke. Measured. "I am a nurse on this shift." The agent did not challenge her directly. Instead, he said something softer. "That is not the full record." The hallway went still. Even the ventilators seemed quieter. Lena whispered from behind, "What record?" Emily's gaze shifted briefly toward the floor. Just for a moment. Then returned forward. The agent continued. "There is an incomplete operational file tied to your identity that was flagged during tonight's response coordination." Reeves narrowed his eyes. "Operational." The agent nodded once. "Yes." Dana's voice shook slightly now. "Emily, are you federal?" Silence. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the ICU corridor where the ceiling grid had moved earlier. Then back toward the staff around her. And finally, she spoke. "I am not active in any current agency." That was not a denial. And everyone felt it. The agent took a step closer. "Ma'am, the reason this situation escalated so quickly is because of tactical recognition patterns inside the ICU response." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." The agent hesitated. Then spoke carefully. "The suspect avoided predictable containment routes." A pause. "Except in one instance." He looked directly at her now. "When you engaged him." Silence tightened again. Dana whispered, "What does that mean?" Reeves answered quietly instead. "It means he reacted to her like she was trained opposition." The implication landed fully now. Emily had not just stopped an attacker. She had been identified by him as something familiar. Something he recognized. The agent lowered his voice. Your movement triggered a response profile we have seen before in federal threat environments. Emily finally spoke again. Flat. Controlled. That does not confirm anything. The agent nodded. I agree. A pause. Then he added, but it raises classification concerns. Emily's eyes stayed steady. I am here to treat patients. The agent nodded again. Yes. But then he said something quieter. And yet multiple trained individuals are now treating you as a priority target. That sentence changed the emotional weight of the room. Not fear of the attackers anymore, but fear of what Emily represented. Lena stepped slightly back. Dana looked lost. Reeves stayed still, processing everything he had seen tonight through a new lens. Emily turned away slightly, not avoiding them, but closing distance from the conversation, because something above them moved again. A faint metallic shift in the ceiling grid. This time closer. Everyone heard it. The agent raised his hand slightly. Ceiling movement confirmed. Emily interrupted quietly. No. Everyone looked at her. She corrected. One person. A pause. Not two. Reeves frowned. How can you tell that? Emily looked up at the ceiling panel above the medication corridor. Then said softly, Weight pattern. Silence again. The agent slowly reached for his radio, requesting immediate containment support. Before he could finish, a ceiling panel above the far corridor clicked open slightly. Just a fraction. Not enough to drop through. Enough to see. Everyone froze. A shadow shifted above the ICU lighting grid. And for the first time since the breach began, the threat was no longer hidden. It was watching them. And it had chosen a position directly above the most vulnerable part of the ICU. Emily did not move. But her voice came quietly. Move patients away from corridor line. Dana snapped into action immediately. Lena followed. Reeves stepped closer to Emily. Tell me what you need. Emily didn't look at him. Distance. A pause. Then she added. And silence. Above them, the panel shifted again. Preparing. And in that moment, it became clear. Whatever Emily's past was, it had just walked into the same room with her again. The ICU lights dimmed again, this time in a controlled pulse. Not a failure. A disruption. Every monitor flickered in staggered rhythm, as if something inside the system was forcing the hospital to breathe unevenly. From the ceiling grid above the medication corridor, a second panel shifted. A soft metallic click followed. Then stillness. Everyone in the ICU had stopped moving entirely. Even patients who were conscious seemed to sense it, rooms filled with a strange, suffocating awareness. Malik raised his weapon slightly, eyes locked upward. We've got movement overhead. The federal agent beside him spoke into his radio in a low voice. Hold perimeter. No engagement until visual confirmation. Emily stood at the center of the corridor junction. She wasn't looking up anymore. She was listening. Not for sound. For timing. For pressure changes in the air ducts. For the smallest imbalance in movement above them. Reeves stepped closer. You're not reacting like this is new to you, he said quietly. Emily didn't answer. A pause. Then she said, he is waiting for reaction. Lena whispered from behind a supply cart. Who? Emily's eyes stayed forward. The second one. Above them, the ceiling panel shifted again. This time slower. Intentional. Testing response. Malik whispered, if he drops into ICU lanes, we lose control of the floor. Emily finally spoke with precision. He won't drop yet. Reeves frowned. How do you know? Emily tilted her head slightly. Because he's waiting for me to move first. Silence tightened. That single statement changed everything in the room. Dana looked up sharply. Why would he be waiting for you? Emily didn't respond. But her hands tightened briefly at her sides. A microsecond of tension. Then control returned. The agent stepped closer, voice low. Emily, are you certain this is targeted? Emily nodded once. Yes. Another pause. Then she added something quieter. "And it was always going to reach here." A distant metallic sound echoed through the ventilation system. This time not above the ICU. Inside it, somewhere deeper, a service hatch had opened. Malik's radio crackled. Lower corridor breach confirmed. Suspect moving through internal service grid. The second threat was no longer just above them. It was inside the hospital structure, moving downward, toward ICU level. Reeves exhaled slowly. "We're being boxed in," Emily corrected calmly. "No." A pause. "We are being separated." The distinction made Malik glance at her sharply. "What does that mean?" Emily finally turned her head slightly toward the ICU layout map on the wall, then pointed subtly. "Two objectives. Divide response teams. Pull security away from patient core." Dana's face tightened. "The witness." Emily nodded once. "Yes." A sudden loud metallic impact echoed from the far end of the ICU hallway. Not overhead this time. Level ground. From inside the service corridor entrance. The second attacker had arrived. A shadow moved behind the glass panel of the corridor door. Slow. Measured. Not rushing. Observing. Reeves stepped forward instinctively. But Emily raised one hand. "Stop." He froze. The shadow outside the door paused too, as if responding. Emily lowered her voice. "He is reading us," Malik whispered. "Reading how?" Emily's answer came quietly. "Who panics first?" The silence became unbearable. Lena's breathing was audible now. Dana gripped the edge of the nurse's station. The shadow outside shifted again, closer to the door frame, then stopped, waiting. Malik tightened his grip on his weapon. "We end this now." He reached for the door control panel. Emily stopped him again. Faster this time. "No," Malik snapped. "We can't just wait." Emily's voice stayed controlled. "If you open that door now, he gets movement advantage inside ICU lanes within seconds." A pause. Then softer. "And patients lose cover." That last line stopped him. Not because of fear. Because it was true. Above them, another ceiling panel shifted slightly. The first attacker was still positioned overhead. Two threats. Two angles. One trapped ICU floor. Reeves finally spoke, voice strained. "So what is your plan?" Emily didn't answer immediately. She looked at the ICU layout again. Then at the ceiling grid. Then at the service corridor door. "And finally," she said, "we don't chase them." A pause. "We force them to commit in one place." Malik frowned. "How?" Emily stepped slightly toward the medication corridor, then placed her hand on the emergency intercom panel. Dana shook her head. "Emily, don't trigger alerts." Emily pressed it anyway. The system beeped once. Then her voice went out across the ICU. Controlled. Clear. ICU staff, secure all patients in central rooms. Corridor access will be restricted." A pause. Then she added, "Now." Confusion spread instantly among staff. But training took over. Movement began. Patients were repositioned. Curtains drawn. Doors closed. Malik stared at her. "You're consolidating them." Emily nodded once. "Yes." Reeves understood immediately. "You're compressing the battlefield." Emily didn't deny it. Above them, the ceiling panel shifted again. Faster this time. The change was noticeable. Pressure had altered. The attackers were reacting. The plan was forcing them into urgency. The second attacker at the service corridor door moved closer. Now visible fully through the glass. A silhouette. Not chaotic. Controlled. Then the door handle clicked slightly. Testing. Waiting for response. Emily stepped forward into the center of the ICU corridor. Alone. Malik moved to stop her. But she raised one hand slightly. "Don't." And he stopped. For the first time, everyone in the ICU realized something. The attackers weren't just threatening the hospital. They were watching her specifically. The shadow at the door shifted again. And then a voice came through the glass. Calm. Distorted slightly, but directed. Emily Carter. Every head turned instantly. Dana went pale. Reeves froze. Lena covered her mouth. Emily did not move. The voice continued. We know you're here. A pause. Then, open the corridor. Silence swallowed the ICU. Malik raised his weapon higher. Emily finally spoke. Quietly. No. A long pause followed. Then the voice answered. That's what we expected. The ceiling above shifted again. Both attackers now repositioning. Synchronized. Emily exhaled slowly. Not fear. Resolution. Then she spoke one final time. To all ICU staff. A pause. Stay behind cover. Her eyes lifted slightly. To everything else. A beat. Now. And in that moment, the final confrontation began. The ICU did not explode into chaos. It tightened into focus. Every movement became deliberate. Every sound became controlled. Staff had shifted patients into central protected rooms, doors locked, curtains drawn, monitors stabilized as much as possible under pressure. But the threat was no longer outside the system. It was inside it. And it had fully committed. A loud metallic crash came from the service corridor door as it was forced open from the inside. The second attacker entered the ICU walkway without rushing. He moved with control, measuring distance, reading positions. Malik raised his weapon immediately. Hands up. No response. The attacker kept moving forward, eyes scanning the corridor, not the staff. Looking for one person. Emily stood at the center junction again. Still. The ceiling above them shifted at the same time, confirmation that the second threat overhead was now repositioning for coordination. 2 angles. 1 target zone. Reeves whispered, They're synchronizing. Emily nodded once. Yes. The attacker spoke again, voice calm through a comm device. Last warning. Emily did not move. Dana's voice shook slightly behind the desk. Emily, please. But Emily was already observing. Not the gun. Not the voice. The timing between steps. The alignment between corridor positions. She was calculating something no one else could see. Malik shifted slightly closer. Say the word, he said quietly. Emily answered without looking at him. Not yet. The attacker stopped halfway down the corridor. He tilted his head slightly. Listening. Above them, the ceiling panel shifted again. The second unseen attacker prepared to drop. A coordinated breach was seconds away. Reeves stepped forward, voice tight. We cannot hold both angles. Emily finally spoke. We won't. A pause. Then she added. We only need one. That made Malik glance at her sharply. What does that mean? But Emily was already moving. Not forward. Sideways. Toward the ICU lighting control panel near the nurse's station. Dana noticed immediately. Emily, what are you doing? Emily didn't answer. She reached the panel and paused for half a second. Listening again. Above. Corridor. Breathing patterns. Then she pressed one switch. Emergency corridor lighting shifted instantly. Not dark. Not bright. Directional. The ICU corridor layout changed perception in a single second. Shadows sharpened. Angles distorted. Sight lines broke. The attacker in the corridor paused. Just for a fraction. That was enough. Malik realized it instantly. You disrupted visual mapping. Emily nodded once. Yes. Above them, the ceiling attacker shifted again. Uncertain now. The synchronization broke. Reeves whispered, You forced them out of coordination. Emily didn't respond. She was already watching the corridor attacker's reaction. He adjusted stance slightly. Uncertain. For the first time. That was the opening. Malik stepped forward. Now. But Emily raised her hand sharply. No. He froze again. The attacker resumed movement. Cautious. not rushing anymore. He had lost rhythm. Emily watched carefully, then spoke quietly. "He is isolating himself." Dana frowned. "That's bad, right?" Emily shook her head slightly. "No." A pause. "It's predictable." The attacker moved another step forward, then stopped again. Above them, the second attacker shifted inside the ceiling grid, but now without alignment. Disrupted. Fragmented. Emily took a slow breath, then spoke. "Move patients deeper into central rooms." Staff obeyed immediately. The ICU compressed further. Corridors cleared. Sight lines narrowed. Malik looked at her. "You're forcing close-range engagement." Emily nodded once. "Yes." Reeves stared at her. "You're controlling the entire room." Emily didn't answer that, because the attacker in the corridor had now committed fully. He raised his weapon. "Last chance." Emily stepped forward. Alone. Malik tried to follow but stopped as she raised her hand again. "No." She faced the attacker directly. No weapon drawn. No aggression. Only control. The corridor attacker hesitated. A fraction. That hesitation mattered. Because above them, the second attacker dropped. Not randomly. Precisely. Into the far ICU end near the supply corridor. Chaos erupted instantly. But Emily did not turn. She was still focused on the man in front of her. Two threats now active. Split pressure. Exactly as she had planned. Malik shouted, "We're splitting." Emily interrupted calmly. "No." A pause. "Now it ends." She moved. Not toward cover. Not backward. Forward. Into the corridor attacker's space just as he reacted to the drop behind him. His attention split. That was the mistake. Malik moved instantly in support. Reeves pulled patients further back. Dana covered a critical airway line. But Emily was already inside the attacker's reaction zone. A controlled takedown. Not dramatic. Not prolonged. One precise disruption of balance. One controlled disarm. The weapon hit the floor. The attacker hit the wall. Contained. Behind them, Malik secured the second attacker near the supply corridor with backup arriving through emergency access. Within seconds, both threats were restrained. The ICU remained standing, breathing, but changed forever. Silence returned slowly. Not peaceful. Heavy. Federal agents entered again moments later, this time faster, more urgent. One looked at both restrained attackers, then at Emily, and did not speak immediately. Reeves stood still, watching her as if seeing her for the first time. Dana looked exhausted, shaken, but alive. Lena whispered, "It's over." But Emily didn't respond. She simply checked the ICU one more time. Patients stable. No immediate breach risk. Containment holding. Then she removed her gloves, placed them neatly on the counter, and turned toward the exit corridor. Dana noticed instantly. "Emily, where are you going?" Emily paused. For the first time all night. Her voice softened slightly. "Shift is over." Reeves stepped forward. "After everything that happened, where are you going?" Emily looked at him briefly. Not cold. Not emotional. Just final. "Back to work tomorrow." Then she walked toward the service exit corridor. No one stopped her, because no one could agree if she was leaving as a nurse, or as something they were never supposed to fully understand. The door closed quietly behind her, and the ICU remained silent.